Welcome to HAWK MOOR, the unofficial history of Dungeons & Dragons, Greyhawk, Blackmoor, Gary Gygax, and Dave Arneson. I am author, researcher, and game designer, Kent David Kelly. If you enjoy this video series, please consider buying a PDF or paperback version of my book, HAWK MOOR, Book 1, The Dragon Rises. See the links below in my description of this video. This is Episode 6, Gygax meeting Arneson, covering the years 1968 and 1969. As we discussed in Episode 4, the creation of Gary Gygax's and Don Kay's Sand Table would usher in a new era of interested gamers and increasing presence in medieval wargaming. The timing of these basement games was opportune because Gary would experience another fateful meeting toward the end of 1968. He made the friendly acquaintance of a troubled young man living in his neighborhood, a boy named Robert J. Kuntz. It is likely that Gary saw some of himself in Rob's unorthodox and imaginative nature, and early on he seems to have realized that he had discovered a kindred soul. Rob shared some interesting details concerning his past and Gary's, which I have taken the liberty of summarizing here. Rob, who would soon prove to be an intelligent and creative free spirit and Gary's good friend, was only 13 at the time. He lived just 3 blocks away from the Gygax family home. His father had died in a car accident when he was only 2 years old, and Rob had no memories of the man. His hard-pressed mother experienced many hardships that winter, 1968 and 1969, and so Rob was being cared for, or at least watched out for, by his neighbors. Rob's interest in a game advertisement found in a magazine led him to the local Schultz Brothers 5 and 10 cent store where a few Avalon Hill board games were being sold. The store's assistant manager, Larry Zirk, let Rob know that these games could be played over at Mr. Gygax's house. His interest raised, Rob introduced himself to Gary a week later and accepted an invitation to play some games. As Rob once fondly remembered in an interview, quote, "I was kind of taken in by the family. I was 13 years old. I went through all the pains and pleasures of the family. Gary took me under his wing and kind of pushed me to read things and to experience things." This was the beginning of a friendship that would endure through several rocky times, to be sure, for 40 years, until Gary passed away in 2008. Rob, as we shall see, would prove to be instrumental in the playtesting and refinement of both Chainmail and the later Dungeons & Dragons. Months passed, many more games were played, and the basement quickly became known as Lake Geneva Gamer Central. The time flew by, and soon it was time for Gary to start planning for Gen Con 2. Everyone was expecting it, although Gary himself was not so enthusiastic as of yet. After all, somebody had to take the financial risk and do all of the work. The work was not trivial either. When Gary had first been setting up the horticultural hall in preparation for Gen Con 1, and then especially in that event's aftermath, he had vowed he would never run a gaming convention again. But, much like having children, or a beloved hobby requiring any serious toil, in time the tiring memories become nostalgic, while the negative realities fade away. It is worth it after all. It is good to have something difficult to enjoy. By the early summer of 1969, Gen Con 2 seemed like a great idea. And besides, many of the gamers who attended Gen Con 1 had told their friends just how amazing it was to meet fellow enthusiasts arriving from scores, hundreds, or even over 1,000 miles away. How could there not be another Gen Con? The wargamers needed it, and they loved it. A tradition had been born. Having witnessed the success and failures of that first gaming convention, held over a sweltering summer weekend, Gary and his companions knew exactly which improvements were required for this second incarnation. As a result, Gen Con 2, held over August 23rd and 24th, 1969, featured more goodies in the form of hot dogs and Coca-Cola, cheerfully vended out by Gary's daughters. As daughter Elise would remember, quote, "I was the original hot dog and soda girl. When I started, I could barely see over the counter." Despite all of the quizzical big people gaming going on, the girls had an avid personal interest in these strange festivities because they got to keep all of the dimes and quarters they received as pay. Returning attendee Mike Carr would later note that the nonstop volunteerism exhibited at Gen Con 2 was really a major aspect of the event's developing spirit. It was something that would keep it going for many years to come. It was really the volunteers, he noted. Mike said, not just the people that offered to run game events, which are extremely important, because that's what really makes the convention great, is offering a variety of activities, but also the people behind the scenes who are manning the door and doing the pre-registration and just kind of all the back of the house sort of stuff that makes these things a success. Rob Kuntz was there as well, ready and eager to enjoy his first ever gaming con. There were far more friends this time around and fewer strangers. Gen Con 2 also appears to have been the first time that Gary Gygax and Minnesota wargamer David Lance Arneson met face to face. Dave was happy to have a gaming con to go to, as opportunities to find new potential wargame club members in Minnesota were somewhat lacking at the time. Therefore, Dave had journeyed down to Lake Geneva and had brought several of his friends along, driving them all the way from the Twin Cities, some 6 hours and 330 miles away. When Dave and Gary met, and Gary was enticed by Dave's collection of miniature sailing ships, they realized that they shared many interests and similar ideas about how rigid rule systems might be further and sometimes wildly improved with a little creative thinking. These two men would rarely see eye to eye on the exact tweaks they believed needed to be made to any game, but all in all, they got along famously. For a time. A designer-to-designer rapport developed between the two men, which would result in a naval combat game called Don't Give Up the Ship, and later would find them working as co-authors on the material which eventually became Dungeons & Dragons. This Gen Con meeting would also serve to create stronger ties between the small yet robust wargaming societies which were active at that time, both in Lake Geneva and in the Twin Cities. Other events included an auction, Napoleonic wargaming, the Fight in the Skies tournament, diplomacy, and World War II scenarios, particularly the Siege of Stalingrad. Worthy persons such as the returning Mike Carr, running Fight in the Skies, and soon to help Gygax and Arneson with edits on their naval rules, as well as Bill Hoyer, Washington Perry, David Wesley, originator of the influential Bronstein wargame and role-playing scenarios, and many other gamers would play and converse at Gen Con 2 as well. Mr. Perry played in an intriguing cerebral and social role-playing game of sorts called Internation Simulation, which required diplomacy, eloquence, quick thinking, and well-reasoned appeals to the game referees. In all, an incredible number of paid attendees were counted for this con, nearly 200 in all. Even better, the event was held over a span of 2 days, officially this time. Gen Con 2 was a complete success, and the demands for a regular annual event were all but inevitable. In the future, Gary would certainly have his work cut out for him. Following after Gen Con 2, Gary's gaming continued throughout the fall and winter of 1969. The Sand Table Play Group grew, and ever more creative scenarios were improvised. Eventually, perhaps at the end of 1969, and certainly before April of the following year, Gary, along with Rob Kuntz and the rest of the Lake Geneva regulars, finally managed a long-awaited coup. They were procuring a collection of the prized Hauser elastilin figures. According to Gary, these treasures were from the already appreciated collection of Jeff Perrin. Mr. Perrin once noted, by the way, that he didn't ever play Chainmail after it was published, because Gary had all of his figures. Gary would later supplement this rare Hauser collection by buying directly from Henry Bodenstedt. Jeff Perrin was solely interested in historical war games, but having Perrin's figures without his physical presence would now give Gary an opportunity to push his creative gaming a little farther. Crucially, this is the moment at which Gary says he first got the idea to begin experimenting with fantasy games. As he said, the elastilin figures were so heroic looking that it seemed a good idea to play some games which would reflect the action of the great sword and sorcery yarns. As noted earlier, Jeff Perrin had written a few pages of medieval miniatures rules to go along with the figures. Gary had enjoyed those rules, but he now felt that he could expand upon them in an unexpected way. He asked Jeff for permission to build upon those proven medieval rules, and Jeff kindly acquiesced. As Jeff was one of the strongest proponents of the historical simulation movement, he would have had little interest in further developing these rules in Gary's desired direction of Conan and Elric-inspired swords and sorcery. "I loved those figurines, and I enjoyed those rules," Gary once said, "and so I expanded them into around 16 pages. And as a result, great things were about to happen. And we will talk about all of that in our next episode of HAWK MOOR. Thank you for watching and listening. I will see you again soon. Welcome to HAWK MOOR, the unofficial history of Dungeons & Dragons, Greyhawk, Blackmoor, Gary Gygax, and Dave Arneson. I am author, researcher, and game designer. The unofficial history of Dungeons & Dragons. If you enjoy this video series, Blackmoor, please Gary Gygax, and Dave Arneson. A PDF or paperback version of my book, researcher and game designer, Book 1, David The Dragon Rises. If you enjoy this video series, in my description of this video, buying a PDF.